Hello, this is Robert Challenger, and today I'm going to be talking about vocabulary enrichment in Middle English. Firstly, it's important to talk about prior to Middle English, which started in 1100. So, Old English was primarily Anglo-Saxon era. It was 450 to 1100. And in terms of the lexis, it was mostly Germanic due to invasions of Germanic tribes like Angles, Saxons and Jutes. In addition to this, there were Latin borrowings at the hands of Christian monks. This links to the Christianization of England. Some French words came into Old English after close contact between France and England. Monks trained in France and came to England subsequently. King Edward the Confessor himself spent time in northern France and brought back French courtiers, so princes and noblemen, in 1041. In contrast with this though, Middle English was much more open to foreign influence. There was a huge influx of Norman French vocabulary into English language after the Battle of Hastings in 1066. And many people say this moment was the start of Middle English itself, as opposed to 1100, as it was like the big turning point in power, really. As the Norman nobility and bishops and craftsmen and merchants settled in England, the English language was somewhat Frenchified. For the first century after the conquest, Norman French was the language of the court and the upper classes, which was the case until the 13th century. Now I will play this video that explains the aftermath of the Norman conquest of England and how it affected the English language.
True to his name, William the Conqueror invades England, bringing new concepts from across the Channel like the French language, the Doomsday Book, and the duty-free Gauloise multipack. French was de rigueur for all official business, with words like judge, jury, evidence and justice coming in and giving John Grisham's career a kickstart. Latin was still used ad nauseam in church, but the common man spoke English, able to communicate only by speaking more slowly and loudly until the others understood him. Words like cow, sheep and swine come from the English-speaking farmers, while the à la carte versions, beef, mutton and pork, come from the French-speaking toffs, beginning a long-running trend for restaurants having completely indecipherable menus. All in all, the English absorbed about 10,000 new words from the Normans, though they still couldn't grasp the rules of cheek-kissing. The bonhomie all ended when the English nation took their new warlike lingo of armies, navies and soldiers and began the 100 Years' War against France. It actually lasted 116 years, but by that point no one could count any higher in French, and English took over as the language of power.
In terms of the French influence on Middle English vocabulary, well, it was quite immense, really. 10,000 words, as said by the video, were imported from France. 70% new words from French were nouns, and many were abstract nouns, which were needed because there were a lot of new concepts like government, majesty, treason, authority. A lot of new things which France brought to England at this time. 3/4 are still in use today. Almost all words to do with aristocracy derive from France, so Duke, Duchess, Prince, and the names of all precious stones are French: sapphire, ruby, emerald, diamond, etc. This is because England wasn't really a hub for collecting precious stones. The French brought these precious stones over with them. However, French wasn't the only source of new vocabulary in the Middle English period. Scandinavian words were imported. While there is only evidence that these Scandinavian words came about in the 13th century, mostly in the northeast of England where the Danish settlement was great, it is thought that in the 9th century after the Viking invasion, this was when the words started to be brought over, but according to the manuscripts, the 13th century was officially when it started. They brought over some 1,000 words. Unlike French though, these words were not exclusive to educated people. As you can see, words like die, call, take, knife, all quite basic words. In contrast with the French words that were relatively, like, for the time, they were high. Like, a lot of people would have struggled to comprehend them. Moving on, there was a fresh influx of Latin in the 14th and 15th centuries, particularly after the Renaissance in Europe and the resurgence of interest in classical languages and culture. There were several thousands of words brought in from Latin, and these, unlike Scandinavian words, these were indeed associated with educated people. The words concern topics like religion, law and science, with some examples being requiem, homicide and mechanical, respectively. Latin was also used to create a high style in writing we call these Oriental terms. Some examples of these are Oriental, meditation and adjacent. People use these words to elevate themselves from the uneducated masses. As foreign influence in Middle English grew, the vocabulary became rich in synonyms. So for example, in adjectives, in Old English, the adjective would be kingly. In French, it was royal, and in Latin, it was regal, all meaning the same thing. But now they had the choice, a growing choice, as a result of the growth. So why did Middle English vocabulary grow so rapidly? Well, words can be substituted much easier if they don't have to change the word endings as much. And this relates to how in Old English there was a change in syntax, and in particular a lot of lost inflectional endings, and because of that it made a lot of loan words possible, a lot of foreign loan words possible. Also, the surge in contact obviously with French speakers from the 11th century onwards. This was always going to result in a growth in Frenchification, if you like, because they've got to communicate with each other, or else they just cannot coexist. And the Renaissance finally brought new interest in general Latin scholarship, and not solely associated with the church. So Latin became almost trendy, like in the educated spheres.